Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. The hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. On my far right is Dr. Duncan Ojwang. He teaches contemporary issues and international law, regional integration and diplomatic law. Good morning, Dr.
Good morning, sir.
Lovely having you here after yesterday's event at State House.
Yes.
And looking forward to your account here. Evans Ogad, an advocate, law lecturer and the chair of the East African Law Society. Good morning, Evans.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you.
Chair of the East Africa Law Society, Rule of Law Committee.
And Rule of Law Committee.
Rule of Law Committee. I will be taking somebody else's job.
Rule of Law Committee.
Yes.
Good morning. Lovely having
sir.
you here. Ahmed Hashi is governance and policy analyst as well as diplomatic commentator. Good morning, Ahmed.
Ayub, I'm delighted to be here. I've not been here before. I think this is my first time. And actually, for me, it's a real privilege. I thank you for inviting me. And Niko Karibu, mesema asante sana.
Asante as well, and welcome. Thank you. Gentlemen, let's discuss and take it further. The highlights of the publications as well are a reflection of what yesterday happened at State House. The Standard says Raila Odinga unleashed bitter political rivals yesterday united in presence of the world, with 3 visiting East African heads of state giving their backing to the former Prime Minister, describing him as a bold, visionary and steadfast Pan-Africanist whose professional and technocratic credentials make him the ideal candidate for the African Union Commission chair to succeed Musa Faki Mahamat, but subject to the elections. Raila's show of power, says the Daily Nation. The Ruto administration yesterday asserted, according to the paper, its influence by rallying the support of the East African community as it unveiled Raila Odinga's candidacy for the chairperson of the African Union Commission. Salva Kiir, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, Samia Suluhu Hassan, Olusegun Obasanjo, Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, while Presidents Evariste Ndayishimiye, Burundi, and Paul Kagame, Rwanda, were represented by their representatives respectively. Ahmed, first to you. You worked with Odinga during the Grand Coalition government, and you know the man. Before we get into the nitty-gritty details of what awaits the man and the country ahead of the continent-wide campaigns, what can you tell us about the persona?
Good morning. I think what is important is to look at the context today of the African continent and the states and the nations that are there and how we expect they're going to behave towards Kenya's candidate, Mr. Odinga. I think Mr. Odinga is going to lose this election in Addis Ababa, and I think I'm the only one who thinks that. I think that across the board, everybody believes that he's going to win. I will be shocked if he gets even a slim majority. I think the candidate from Djibouti is going to win a landslide. And I'll tell you why. First, let me give you a little bit of a context on the African continent. I think there are three things that are happening in the continent. There's a rebellion of the youth, as you know, as we have it here in Kenya, across from Senegal all the way to the Sahel, all the way to Sudan. There is a popular national democratic revolution. I can't find any other word for it except revolution or transformation. And one of the major issues that young people are fighting over is because there's bad governance and terrible economy. And the way Africa is structured in the international political economy, it's set up to fail. Because I'll give you a simple example. For example, in West Africa, there are countries that produce cocoa but cannot build a chocolate factory because they signed it off to the Swiss government. So what this produces is children crossing the Sahara, going to Europe to look for better prospects. In an ironic twist, the wealth that's there, it's already coming from where they're running away from. So there is a malaise on the African continent about transformation and change. And I predicted this on another station, and that change has come here in the form of General Z. And I think it's going to go all the way down to South Africa. Now, the people who are in charge of these nation states around the world have fundamental influence from the metropole. By the metropole, I mean there is this really neo-colonial words that are used for certain sections of Africa. For example, in West Africa, it's francophonie. It's influenced by the French. Then there is some parts that are called lusophone. And then there is the English-speaking ones. And so the AU is divided based on these fundamental tectonic plates. And one of the biggest influences of the AU is the French. Now, Amina, and I was a spokesman at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Chief of Staff there, we knew we were going to win. And then the French government intervened heavily in those elections. And we lost. We even had the support of Djibouti. This Djibouti that is standing here today.
Yeah.
One of the people who stabbed us in the back in that election. I think that the same scenario is what is going to happen in the AU. I think the French, the Sahel areas, major states in Central Africa are going to stand up to the candidature of Mr. Odinga and say no. Secondly, before I pass it on, is that I think this is the wrong move for Mr. Odinga. The question is whether or not in a continent where the 80% of the people are under 25, whether or not it serves the interest of the continent for us to have a man who's retiring in his 80s, whether he's going to have the energy, the vitality, and the gusto to understand and do the necessary issues that are supposed to be done about youth, the youth bubble in our continent. Lastly, you know that the African Union has no teeth. It is a place where, for an example, I'll give you a simple example. There's been coups in the Sahel. And one of the most important provisions of the African Union is that if you do a coup, you're done. But most Africans support the coups in the Sahel, including their populations, because there has been massive exploitation of resources of the French Republic in the Sahel. For example, the French have the largest gold deposits in Europe, and they don't have gold in France, Ayub.
Okay. We'll explore more about the Francophone and the Anglophone divide because out of the 54 countries, Anglophone make up 24, countries, Francophone 28, and there's a thin line there. Dr. Duncan, yesterday when we met at State House, so as the attendees at the congregation that gave Odinga a rapturous response, you were as hopeful as they were. But beyond the buzz and beyond the fanfare, looking forward now, it's embarking on that very complex journey, is it, of convincing the entire continent through campaigns? I mean, how do you plan to overcome all these hurdles?
Good morning, and I think I'm optimistic because right now Raila is the front runner. He is the front runner in this race. Compared to even Djibouti, Kenya has 23 missions in Africa. Djibouti only has about 8 or 9. Raila's the network from his father that probably Amina did not have. Raila's name need no introduction in the continent. And of course, I agree it's the ultimate test of his political. It's more of a steeplechase, not marathon. So it will take a lot of jumping, a lot of barriers. But I think that he had a very good start, where all the panelists are very good students of international relations and teachers. You know that it is surprising that to have Tanzania commit very early. Since the first collapse of East African community, you know that we have always have really sibling rivalry between Kenya trying to be an anchoring state and Tanzania. But you saw how the President Suluhu came out so clear. And so there is something going on that probably is different, that the East African community, you saw the confession, how the head of states was saying, we told those other people that Raila is the candidate, and this is the regional candidate. That approach is a very, the sub-regional candidate. That approach is very different from how the Amina campaign was ran. If you look at the synergy between Odembo and the PS Foreign Affairs forming a joint secretariat, look at the Raila span of his network. You can't compare to Amina. Look at his trajectory. If Raila is a single string instrument, he's really a Pan-Africanist.
Okay, but Dr. As you mentioned that yesterday the endorsement came from three present heads of state, Suluhu Hassan, Tanzania, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, Uganda, and Salva Kiir, who is the chair of the East African Community. Of course, Paul Kagame and Evariste Ndayishimiye were represented 5. So you have 49 to still go and convince. And it isn't an easy task, is it?
I saw that. No, it's never easy. That's why I'm saying it's a steeplechase rather than marathon. I saw that South Africa, surprisingly, has also endorsed Raila.
If I could just interview, the president there is a very close friend of Mr. Odinga. There's no question that South Africa will support Mr. Odinga.
That is huge. You know that is huge.
That's huge.
Yeah.
But the question is the intervention of the international community.
Okay, Ahmed, we'll talk about the intervention because that's very key. Yeah. And allow me to get Evan's thoughts here because one of the key individuals who will be running the campaigns and the coordination center is the Principal Secretary at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Abraham Korir Sing'oei, who I spoke to on Monday. And this is what he told me in the event Kenya fails in its latest bid.
This is one of those moments which Kenya must seize. Because unless we do that, it will take another 30 or so years for Kenya to become eligible again to vie for this position. The reason for that is that the AU has recently come up with what is called a rotational framework by which people are sent into high office. And therefore, by that rotational framework, this is the turn of the eastern region to nominate a candidate, and Kenya falls within the eastern region. It will take another 4 rounds for it to come back to the eastern region. And when it comes to the eastern region, if Kenya has vied on this, during this round, that means that Kenya will have to give way to another country. And so it will be several rounds before Kenya actually becomes eligible again.
Evans, with that background in mind and how we ran a very proper PR campaign in the Amina Mohammed campaigns in Addis, President Kenyatta was among one of the first early arrivals in Addis Ababa, the Ethiopian capital. With this background in mind that the Principal Secretary has mentioned, how then can Kenya, in a seat that they must win, come up with strategies to overcome the hurdles that are very clear and apparent, learning from the failed bid by Ambassador Amina Mohammed?
First of all, before I address myself to that, I want to be categorical that the choice of date yesterday for the launch of this bid was perhaps not the smartest. Yesterday was 27th of August. 27th of August for the country means that we were supposed to be marking the 14th anniversary of the Constitution inauguration. So if I were in government and if I were Mr. Odinga, I will not have chosen yesterday for the launch of this bid. That having been said, let's go back to the year 2013. Uhuru Kenyatta comes into government, and we have had a series of campaigns for international jobs, be it the political offices or once in a while the judiciaries around international organizations.
Yeah.
Kenya has failed. And it points to something quite serious in terms of our capacity as a country. During that period, Uganda has managed to slot in 2 judges, one at the ICC, one at the ICJ. Rwanda, under Paul Kagame, Ethiopia, has created mechanisms for international lobbying and bidding. So the question then asks, what is it that Kenya is doing wrong that every other person seems to be getting right? Perhaps we may ask, because the lobbying and getting the ear of these capitals does not only start with this kind of ad hoc arrangements with, like Mr. Odinga or Ambassador Amina's candidature. Who are our ambassadors in some of these countries? Because that's where you start. Then secondly, what is our relationship with those ambassadors that are sent here? What is the relationship of the president, because he's the face of our diplomacy, with his peers out there? So those are dynamics that will determine the success or not of this candidature. And speaking to that as well, I want to agree with Hashi to some extent here. Very early into his presidency, the president sent out a tweet with regards to Western Sahara. Western Sahara is quite an emotive issue in Africa, and Western Sahara has allies in Africa. I don't know if that will come to bite us. We have seen tweets on the coups in the Sahel area. We have around 3 leaders who came in through coups, and statements emanating from Nairobi sounded like speeches drawn in Paris, France. Will that come to bite us? So there are things that we have done or failed to do and may as well impact on this candidature. Mr. Odinga is a seasoned politician, but he has not been mainstream government. He has not been mainstream government. He has been associated with so-called opposition politics. So he comes in as, quote-unquote, an outsider. He's not been a member of the boys' club. So perhaps the optics that are being sent out there is that this person, and rightly so, I've seen some comments to that effect, that he is coming in as a candidate so as to solve Kenya's domestic politics. So that is something that is being projected. I don't know how that will pan out.
His support base would argue that he formerly served as a prime minister. He was recently the special envoy for infrastructure across the continent, and having projected himself as, or self-styled himself as a champion for democracy. Will all these credentials not matter in your view?
Very little. Because, for example, if you want to have access to offices of power in Africa, you need to be front and center. You have to be a president or having served as a government minister for a considerable period of time for you to even have those considerable networks. You have to have been an ambassador for some time so that you create those networks and people know you. My educated guess will be he may not have one-on-one contacts with a good number of these head of states that are going to vote. His candidature is also tied to how Kenya has conducted itself. Remember, I've told you that Kenya has failed majorly since 2013 in a series of campaigns. That speaks to institutional incapacity. Secondly, in terms of our diplomacy, how have we been relating to colleagues who are Africans? How have we been relating to the African Diplomatic Corps, who are Kenya's ambassadors in these capitals? Because the latest trend we see in this country is to send political action figures as ambassadors in most of these capitals.
Okay. Ahmed, looking at shortly the profile of the Djibouti candidate, Mohamed Yusuf, and he speaks French. He has, or could be having, the support of the Arab countries in the north, given his background, and he locks up the Francophone countries, and that may end up again blowing up what is a perfectly set campaign by Odinga and team.
If I can use a French quip, the great Maximilien Robespierre, the Jacobin, said that if you want to make an omelette, you have to break some eggs. Now, this fellow is a spoiler from Djibouti. He is there to come and break the eggs for Mr. Odinga, not to be the chairman of the AU. I'll tell you why. The late Muammar Gaddafi, Allah yarhamah, is the person who moved the African Organization of African Unity to the African Union. And he wanted to bring together the states in Africa to what's called the United States of Africa. The French government, which is deeply involved in our continent, had just got spooked. and it organized the European Union and the United States to invade Libya.
And NATO.
And because Muammar Gaddafi wanted to turn the oil money into one currency called the dinar, and his funding of the African Union too, was a huge international stab at the hegemony of the Americans and the Europeans. Now, I think if I were to give Mr. Odinga free advice, was that he should start pushing the Chinese to get involved with the African Union. You know that hall there that has been built by the Chinese? Okay? And China is a latter-day comer into the politics of Africa. It's unfortunate for me to say that Africa is being, there's a lot of puppetry going on with our states because we don't want to create the African Union and get a proper president in our region. Mm-hmm. We don't want to do the necessary things because the political elite across the continent are just bankrupt. They've failed. If you ask the Gen Zs, who make up 80% of the population of this country, yesterday there was a poll on Twitter, 72% of the people of this country believe Odinga is not going to win. 72% of people in the grassroots, just normal people. And I think that is more of an expression of an anger against Mr. Odinga about domestic affairs than issues around the AU.
Is it because of his détente with the president?
No, this is not a détente. They're sleeping together. Détente is shaking hands, and détente is a completely different issue. Here, people it's like a Kenya, come home, come we stay kind of relationship that this government has. So I think that it is important for us to understand, and this will be made clear, of the fundamental international involvement. For an example, the East African presidents who came here came as a favor to Mr. Ruto. Mr. Ruto was on the phone. He said, I need you guys to do this for me. Museveni did not support Mr. Odinga for the AU. He flip-flopped. About a month ago, he didn't want anything to do with that. Now he's on the line because East Africa has to come up with a united front. And I think that this taking away Mr. Odinga and getting rid, as my learned friend on the right has said, that they're taking him out of the issue and domestic considerations and sending him to the AU, is going to come back and bite Mr. Ruto in a way that it has never bitten him before. Because I may criticize my former leader. I've worked with him. I know him. And I won't be surprised if Mr. Odinga is carrying a knife in his jacket and biding his time to come back and deal with Mr. Ruto in the future.
Okay. Dr. Duncan, when we get back from the break, we'll proceed talk about what Odinga also yesterday had shared with the attendees at State House, including his vision for the continent, outlining some of the major itemized issues that he said he will embark on if he clinches the seat. But it's not given. It's subject to the elections. And the current chairperson of Musa Faki Mohammed, gentlemen, you agree with me, was a little-known candidate from a little-known country. And you remember President Kenyatta and even the Kenyan delegation extended party invitations to one of the five-star hotels in Addis to celebrate Amina Mohammed's win until the heads of state had voted and the vote was counted, and later it emerged that Mohammed was the winner. So we'll talk about that and the landmines that he talked about, the French, what's happening in West Africa, in the East African region, and the dalliance between President William Ruto and some of the regional leaders who, as him, have not been subjected to rigorous democratic process, and which is keeping some democratic commentators very worried regarding democracy and institutionalism. All that after the break here on the broadcast. Stay tuned.